for joining us today. My name is Kelley Mack, and I'm a principal on the Workbench team. For those who are unfamiliar with Workbench, we're an early stage enterprise VC based in New York. We invest in early stage startups throughout the country and are obsessed with all things enterprise sales and go-to-market. I personally love having conversations with leading technologists on the field on major trends, priorities, and pain points in the enterprise. And as our motto goes, great things happen at the intersection of suits and hoodies. And I'm really honored to be able to have this conversation out in the open with everybody here today on with Mark Settle and David Hahn on the next generation of data protection, which is a huge topic that we're often talking about. And so for everybody in the room today, if you have any questions, feel free to send over any questions that you have throughout the webinar into the Q&A. We'll be sure to get to it at the end. And so with that, we'll begin. And so we'll first start off with a couple of brief introductions. And so Mark and David, if you could please introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then in classic Workbench fashion, we always have an icebreaker. And the icebreaker today will just be, if you weren't a CIO or a CISO, what would you be doing today? And we can start with Mark.
So I am currently a consultant. So I have the opportunity to work with a number of startup companies and with some interesting venture capital firms like Workbench, and I'm thoroughly enjoying myself. But I have the benefit of having been a CIO 7 times in different industries and for companies of different size. And what I would be doing today if I wasn't still in the technology field, I would probably be a history professor at college. I'd probably be leading battlefield tours somewhere in Virginia.
That is awesome. And for those that don't know, Mark is a prolific writer, and Mark has written a bunch of books. And yeah, you should definitely check out his writing. Obviously, we're doing this webinar today based off of great work that he and a bunch of other CISOs like David helped pitched in for. And with that, I'll pass it over to David. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Kelley. Glad to be here, everybody. David Hahn. I'm a CISO and currently with us in the automotive industry. So we work with what we call the OEMs, which is GM, Ford, Toyota, all the big car makers, and then also the dealers. In North America, there's already about 30,000 dealers out there, right?
Having a little trouble.
So we provide a bank. Let's see if I can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah, you were breaking up a little bit there.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so so I won't go into all that. So let me answer your question. What would I be doing? Well, actually, I'm already doing it, and I talked about it at the intro with the guys, is to be a chicken farmer. The chickens, and make sure they go, and I get 2 eggs every morning, so I'm happy with that.
Awesome. And David, because your internet connection is coming in and out, if you want, you can turn off video and you can go just pure audio, and we can carry on through that.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Cool. And so to level set the room, we're here today to talk about DLP, or data protection, and what's needed to bring it into the modern age. But if we can start with level setting on why is data security today so hard? What are the top challenges? Mark or David, perhaps we can have Mark kick it off on what are some of the biggest data security challenges. But yeah, would love to hear your perspective on why do we need to rethink DLP?
Well, fundamentally, a DLP is an attempt to enforce defense in depth strategies which have been developed for cyber attacks, the bad guys coming in and defending a series of security perimeters, and then kind of flipping that upside down and using those same perimeters to protect against the loss of data. And unfortunately, we've reached a stage where there are many restrictions, both financial and ethical and regulatory, on how data can actually be used within a corporation. And so, although you need to worry about data loss for obvious reasons, breaches are always a bad thing, that's a necessary but not sufficient capability. In addition, you need to be able to monitor and control the uses to which data is being applied. And now everybody knows about privacy data, you know, GDPR, CCPA, et cetera. But there are many other types of data in a corporation. There can be non-public material information that could be, you know, affect the price of a stock or the mechanics of the marketplace. There could be intellectual property, or frankly, there could be just any form of data that's been acquired by a company under some form of consensual agreement or contractual agreement. So there could be terms and conditions about how that's used. And in most corporations, that internal use scenario is not one that's, you know, well governed or regulated or even recognized in some cases. Mm-hmm. So that's really the frontier, is to not just worry about the loss problem, but also the internal misuse.
Got it. David, would love to hear from your experience. You've been a CISO, you're currently a CISO in the automotive industry. You've been at SVB, you were at Hearst. And I'm going to assume that data security is always a challenge everywhere, but would love to hear from you. What are some of the top challenges that you've seen in data security? Hey, David, you still there?
Yep. Hey, guys. Okay, so sorry about that. I think I keep going in and out. So, you know, DLP certainly has been around for a long time. And, you know, in terms of what's worked, what hasn't worked, you know, certainly anything that is a structured data. So we're talking like social security numbers or credit card numbers, you know, where it's a preset format, you know, you know exactly what that looks like. So the machines and the you know, tools can detect that. So I think that's fine, and relatively, I would say, easy to do there. It's unstructured data that's been very difficult, right? So when you get into healthcare, just even what is PII, it's not just a name, right? I mean, in medical records, PII is a lot of things that get to it. So to be able to correctly identify that is definitely a challenge. And then also that there are many, you know, uses that is perfectly correct, right? You gotta share that PII data within the healthcare systems, for example. And so you don't want to be blocking those, right? So anybody tries to put in a DLP solution in kind of healthcare systems, you know, you're going to stop the business, right? So that has not worked well, and it's been very difficult, I would say. So I see most places, you know, literally shutting that off and trying to come up with all, you know, other ways, just having more secure connections, or, you know, having, you know, point-to-point, you know, sharing of data. So really, DLP, I don't think has been successful in that arena. And so that it really, I think, represents the opportunity, as we're talking about here, which is we got to kind of graduate to the next generation, whatever that is. And yet we still keep calling things DLP. And so I think that's part of the problem, because I still hear from vendors, I still hear from the typical, who are all telling me I need DLP. I go, no, I don't want that, because that doesn't really work.
That's a great point. And as you said, data is an asset, and a lot of organizations want to be data driven, and a lot of this is driven by the organization, by CIOs. So Mark, would love to hear from your perspective, as when you were a CIO, how did you enable the use of data while managing the risk, and how did that translate into working with the security organization?
So, you know, there's just some basic hygiene around data management, things like classifying data, so, you know, you're not trying to come up with like wall-to-wall peanut butter protection for every type of data that's in the company, enforcing retention policies, using encryption to try to minimize data in the clear, you know, and then really managing entitlements. And so that's a, you know, with very popular buzz phrase in the industry that people are the perimeter, you know, in the way that we work today. And IT ends up managing both the access permissions, what people can get at, and then their authorization privileges, what they can do once they gain access. And almost every organization suffers from permission creep and privilege escalation. You know, employees call in every day and ask for more permissions and more privileges. They never call in and say, gee, could you turn this off because I don't need this anymore? You know, they just leave that for somebody else to figure out. So, you know, just like the same way you read the Verizon breach report every year, and the basic problem is patching, or, you know, having unsupported OS capabilities on some of your hardware, et cetera. There's a lot of basic blocking and tackling and managing data security along those lines that I just mentioned that sometimes gets overlooked, or you know, it's just not pursued on a disciplined basis. And so that's kind of one answer to the question. And I think the other direction I want to go with the question is, You know, we all like to roll our eyes and talk about regulations as like this huge burden, but like everything else in life, there's two sides to the coin. And usually one of the benefits of regulations is it does drive a continuing conversation between the security side of the IT shop and, you know, the IT ops side of the IT shop, and that the security guys are going to come up with the policies and hopefully help, you know, interpret what the real business risks are associated with the way data is flowing in the corporation. And they can inform and educate the IT side of the shop, you know, about how to configure some of these tools and implement the operational procedures that are needed. And so, you know, when you think about working successfully and the kind of collaboration you want between those two groups, it can always go south. It can always go sideways for sure. But the regulations are sort of a hidden blessing in that they do force an ongoing conversation between the two teams.
Definitely. And actually, David, if I could turn it to you, you said something really interesting where when you're pitched DLP, oftentimes it brings a negative connotation to mind. Would love to hear when you do hear DLP, what comes to mind and why are you so against the current batch of solutions?
Yeah. I mean, to some degree, it's not the vendor's fault, totally. I don't mean to sound it that way, because really the biggest problem that I have is on my side, in the company, because it really is a workflow issue, right? So in terms of how complicated my company moves data, 27 different times, the handoffs, the movement, the customer service people, they need to look it up. So if we have a process or potentially a broken process where data gets copied so many different ways, right? That's the problem, right, that we have. So we need to kind of fix that first, right? In terms of trying to protect it. So really the vendor has no chance to really be successful in my company because of my problems, right, to go through that. So really, the DLP projects that I worked with, that's been the hardest part, which is to change that, right? To change both the culture as well as the workflows that have been embedded probably, before the internet, so to say, right? It's kind of like, why do we do things that way? Well, that's just the way things have been done. And then, they try to digitize it by saying, okay, well, we'll now move this. So I think that's the problem that we have to go through. So we really have to go through a kind of a modernization or digitization, within the company. And then from there, as you optimize that, your DLP solutions could actually have a fighting chance to work. But you still have to go through classification. You still have to go through a lot of work. So yeah, I think if you really look at it, yeah, there's no one vendor's fault. But then what I try to tell the vendors, don't promise me these things because you got to realize the reality, which is the problems that I face on my side. So yeah, so we have to do a lot of cleanup, I would say, to ensure that some of these tools could work, to give it a fighting chance.
So Kelley, let me just chime in there for a second. So it's interesting, I was talking to a startup company that really is developing sort of like a data access security brokerage capability, like a DASB instead of a CASB. And so their thesis is, getting permission to get into an application isn't good enough once to control the use of the data. So you get into the application and there's different types of data in the application. So then there'll be another sort of set of data access permissions or rights that will actually get managed. And they told me that they were going to characterize this as a DLP tool. I said, well, why would you want to do that? Because this is sort of innovative, And so their answer was, yeah, but a lot of companies have DLP budgets. So they already have money in a bucket. And that's what I'm doing, is I'm sort of chasing that bucket. I tried to talk them out of that perspective because I said, no, I think this is more innovative than that. And, exactly, David, to your point, for a lot of cases, it's not going to be really a constructive reaction because people don't want to spend more on DLP. They're looking for basically a different, better, broader answer.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I'll add to it, you talked about, you talked about CASBs, and so let me just, CASB stands for Cloud Access Broker. So basically, if you can imagine, we've gone more and more to SaaS, right? More and more of our data is no longer on-prem. It's out in the cloud. Think of Salesforce and think of everybody, ServiceNow, everybody that's out there providing it. What I would like to see is those vendors taking responsibility and enabling me to provide better, utilize better DLP. So, it just seems to be like, okay, well, we got a SOC to trust us. We'll take care of your data, right? So, but that's not the big concern. It's the usage of the data, right? Whether by my employees or the partners we have and how we allow access, but I don't have visibility, right? And even with CASB tools, I don't have full visibility to what's actually happening. So there has to be kind of risk-based type reporting that the SaaS-based vendor can provide that enhances or at least gives me a fighting chance to understand my DLP, the data risks that are there, right? So unusual downloads, huge amounts of processing going through, or unusual access points, right? So there's got to be different things that can do. But right now, I would say it's still very difficult for the SaaS vendors to cooperate with me, because I want to do the monitoring. I want to be able to get the CASB feed and do a bunch of things. So they're kind of like, well, that's really not the way we do things, right? So again, I think that's part of what has to change, that whoever is the hosting or has the data, if they're a vendor, you have to have these responsibilities that come with it. And so I think that has to do with kind of data management, data governance. And so we have to see that so that I have a good chance to, again, use the tools and that I have visibility to see what's happening.
Actually, piggybacking off of that, right? As you just said, when you're working with SaaS companies, there's an expectation that you have for them to integrate with your current environment. For the audience, can you share like what are the typical integrations that you would want? Is it, into your SIEM? Is it with the DLP provider that you're already using, with other workflow systems? Would love to share to the group, like what are the typical security requirements that you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, because I love to get another tool, right? I mean, you hear security. No, I'm kidding, right? Nobody wants another tool. Nobody wants another, like, oh my God, doohickey, things like that, right? So it's already, absolutely, it's got to flow into existing controls that I do have. And so, most likely I will have a SIEM. So but it's got to give me relevant data, right? So it's got to give me alerting capability with that versus just dumping. I've seen vendors do that as well. They just kind of like dump me all kinds of logs and like, okay, figure it out, right? And then I got to get a Splunk expert, or I got to get this person to decipher that, right? So we have to kind of get to a set of, manageable data points as well as actionable items, right? So, for example, I've seen this with Microsoft, more and more, obviously, everybody's now gone to Office 365. They've taken security, much more seriously now. So if you go into Security Center that Microsoft provides in Azure, there is now output that comes, not just raw logs, so they're actually giving you actions. I think that's the type of model that we need to see. We need to see every one of these providing actionable alerts that are, risky or a security, incident that may be occurring. So as we provide that. And so really we have to look at this as an integration end to end, because if I were to have designed this from the beginning, I wouldn't have designed it this way, right? So we have these SaaS vendors going to that. Why do we have this? It's got to be continuous, right? And so if the SaaS vendors want to be part of my ecosystem, which, it is, we need to, have full visibility together. We
may have, David, you're breaking up a bit here, but actually, Mark, so I would love to. I mean, we're talking a lot about the importance of integrations here. Oh, David. Yeah, so Mark, you're talking a lot about integrations here. So to make your current technology environment work, because that's already pretty hairy. But the other thing that you have to deal with, obviously, as you're talking about before, is the culture, the collaboration of humans and the employees in your environment. And as you wrote in the report, one of the things you said was that there are several data security concepts that have outlived their usefulness, and one of them being, hey, end user inconvenience. And so I would love to hear from you, how can you rethink data security when security itself is notorious for being a blocker to the business?
So this is a kind of a favorite topic of mine. And when I sent the white paper around for some comments by different CISOs and CIOs, when the paper makes the point that, in many cases, IT shops they're loath to take complaints or criticism from their users. And so therefore, they're very reluctant to inconvenience them in any way with some kind of a security procedure that would block access or turn something off or ask for a second level verification, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the CIOs I highly respect, his sarcastic comment to me back was, he said, I don't know any security team that is ever worried about inconveniencing, end users. But, so I had this little exchange with him. I said, well, think about like MFA. Especially before COVID, there were, based on my experience at Okta, there were tons of companies that were reluctant to introduce MFA, multi-factor authentication, because, it's an extra step, it would inconvenience all those employees that were out there. And I know of other instances where, if you implement some rule-based logic in a DLP system that inconveniences a C-level executive or one of their executive assistants, the call will come down immediately. Why was the CEO's laptop blocked in Malaysia when he stopped in the airport on his way back from Amsterdam? And, who's the jerk down there that set up that kind of a business rule? And that only happens once, and suddenly there's a huge rollback, of all kinds of things that were put in place. So if there's griping about inconvenience, I always think there's two root causes. And so one root cause is you've got technical people trying to implement rules, procedural processes, who don't really have a real understanding of the business risks that are trying to be managed, right? So that you can have grand policies about the way things are supposed to work. The rubber meets the road in trying to configure these different tools. And all too often you've got IT technologists, who just don't have the business acumen or intuition to know the right way to do something. And so in the absence of, that kind of informed insight, they just go off and do things on their own, and sometimes, set up procedures that are maybe too onerous or create this kind of inconvenience. So that's one problem. You got the technologists trying to play business risk managers in the way they configure the tools. The other problem that goes to the heart of this is it's to me, when you see a lot of that kind of noise coming up to the system about this inconvenience, that means you really haven't educated the population at large about the risks that the company is confronting. And you should be like tripling down on your, employee education programs and sensitize them. Instead of being mildly inconvenienced, they should think, thank God somebody's keeping me from, doing something that would harm both the company and maybe my own job security. And, to come up with maybe a personal analog, sometimes, we all do this. If you change your password on your bank account or whatever, you get a little email that says, hey, just so you know, somebody went in, looked like you, told us to make the change, and we made the change. Well, am I inconvenienced by having to open and close that email? That actually kind of gives me a bit of a sense of comfort to know that the loop has kind of been closed, right? So, so I think a long-winded way of saying inconvenience is really an indication that IT people, don't have the business knowledge to set the things up properly, and the people that are complaining really haven't been educated about the threats that are out there to the company.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And David, I don't know if you're back yet, but I don't know if you had anything to chime in there on how security can be an enabler and not a blocker in the business.
Yeah, so it's kind of also tied to what do I try to avoid with certain tools. So I don't like where the burden is on the end user that you must classify something, you must tag something, you must put a something that, right? I mean, again, you got to make me do all these things. We're all busy enough. So that's, to me, is an example of not being an enabler. It should be, I don't know, AI, ML, whatever, right? There's got to be something smart enough that could detect what that is and be able to label things correctly, right? So I think that's the part that we have to be smarter about in terms of it. So again, back to, if we understand the workflows, we should be able to predict how the data is going to flow. So we should see what that team or that group or that person is doing, instead of saying, hey, it's all on you. Okay, you better do the right things, and if you don't, you're going to be fired, right? I mean, I'm sure everybody tries to do the right thing, but sometimes it just doesn't go right. So I think we need the technology to be there to be able to help. And so, yeah, I see it as a burden that I have to do with the community, meaning the security industry, to find the right types of tools that understands how business is done, and then apply it versus, hey, this is the way our tool works, so you have to work around that, right? So to me, that doesn't make any sense. So I think we have to change that paradigm and then really, come up with more innovative ways to understand things versus just burdening, and say, hey, employee, it's your fault.
Definitely. And so actually moving to the point of the paper where, all right, that's old DLP. There's a new way that we can think about data security, and you guys coined the term data misuse prevention, DMP. And so Mark, would love for you to dive into what is DMP and how does this differ from the traditional approach?
Well, again, it's gets away from the concept of defending these infrastructure-based security perimeters, and really think about things like the lineage of data. And so, one of the things that's important in the New World Order is to really try to identify some of these classifications that David referred to and the usage restrictions, at the source system when data assets are originally constructed, then make sure that those kinds of tags, if you will, are inherited by all the daughter assets in the process. And in fact, that lineage chain can actually become a control surface in and of itself. You may say, we're only going to permit the sustained existence of maybe 3 generations of this particular data set. And anything beyond 3 kind of has a half-life of X amount of time, et cetera, because we're just going to let these things like float around within the company till the end of time. So that's important. There's the whole entitlement rights management area is becoming very popular these days. Okta's got a lot of competition in terms of new technologies that are, kind of entering that domain. And then the other thing you're going to see, I think, are policy brokerages. So it's kind of interesting the bind we've gotten ourselves into. David pointed out before, we buy all these tools. They all have all kinds of alerts and notifications and triggers and tripwires. We don't know how to orchestrate all that, so we dump all the data into an SIEM system like Splunk and use that as kind of the mastermind that's going to help filter and get some signal out of the noise of all these things. But most of those tools, actually have embedded procedures and policies that are in place as well. And in the New World Order, I think every tool needs to expose the business logic that's in the tool through APIs, so that all these procedures can be orchestrated in some way without getting into the mix master of the SIEM system. SIEM won't go away. I'm not suggesting that, but we're really underutilizing some of the other tools in the stack. And, really, people need to take action quicker. A lot of the way we do things today is pretty much after the fact. By the time you're sure you've got, a real true signal, all too often you're sort of like looking out the back door. Things have already happened that you would hope would never happen.
And in doing this research, have you found that organizationally approaching data security has changed? So you had mentioned a lot about access policies. Like, are you seeing teams work closer with like the identity and access management team, or if it comes to like what data applications are you using? Are you working more with application teams or even enterprise architecture to leverage some of their governance and data lineage tools? Are you seeing in your research, did you see any change about how organizations end up working together and utilizing the same tools together?
So back to entitlement privileges, I think they're coming under the microscope. The way we've done things in the past, once you had access permission, you were put into some kind of a group structure. And so this group had this set of rights and this group had another set of rights. And there are so many nuances in the needs that people have for access privilege, not access, authorization privileges, whether they can view it or transform it or copy it or send it somewhere else, and whether they need that for the next 30 days during this project or whether they need it, until the end of time, as long as they're in this role, et cetera, and whether they're a consultant or if they're a student intern, and when those things should get turned on and turned off. There's more toolage in place, and I think more of a focus in operational procedures on really managing that permission creep and that privilege escalation that I talked about before. So, I think there's a lot more, if you will, collaboration that goes on between app teams and the ops teams typically than there has been in the past, and trying to really do due diligence on that kind of thing and roll back, constantly roll back and take away things instead of just leaving this kind of huge open door that's there in terms of credentials.
Yeah, great points. And David, turning it over to you, as you think about your own data security strategy, what are the core tools, in your opinion, that make up that data security stack?
Yeah, so as I was joking earlier, yeah, I've got lots of tools, right? And so there's definitely an overflow of it, and a lot of it had to do with that. Yeah, there truly isn't a lot of great integration. Everything is a point solution, right? I need one for this, I need one for that to get through. So I think we have to be kind of smart and creative about looking at. So, for example, privacy has become a very hot thing, right? Because of all the regulations that have come out. We got GDPR, we got California protection, also Virginia just passed one. And so, you could kind of see this, going down this path. So more and more tools are coming out, but it's kind of, I could use that tool for data as well. It doesn't have to be only for privacy, right? It doesn't have to be aligned that way. So I think it all, to me, comes down to, you got to have a strategy first, right? You got to make sure, what is it that you're trying to do? What is it you're trying to accomplish? And then to Mark's point, what are we enabling? Right. I mean, I think too much of not only security, but, the kind of privacy people, we get stuck in what we're not allowed to do. We keep repeating that, but then we never really say, what can you do? Right? And how can you do that? So I think there's got to be emphasis there. So that's got to be part of the strategy to get through. And then I believe in architecture, right? Which is, do we really have a discovery tool that can, scan and really, find where data is all over the place, right? And then how do you ensure that? And then you come up with data protection, right? Which is, okay, if you're going to encrypt, when is it? How do you do it? For the data at rest. Well, what about data in transit, right? How do you break it up? So really start breaking things down. And I think when you do, you are able to then live in a world for your company that hopefully works, right? And I think that's the part. So I think the tools have to align to that versus, here is the coolest tool, which I'm sure there's a lot of them, and let's use it. And then this is going to solve it. Right? There's no silver bullets. I've tried, but there's no silver bullets. So really, to me, it comes down to strategy and putting architecture behind it. I've seen companies that start to utilize this notion of a chief data officer, right? And that data officer is really about enabling. What can you do, right? How do you monetize? How do you do that? But then, the other side of the coin there is, how do you protect, right? So I think working closely together with a chief data officer is very key. So meaning I can't do it alone, because I'm going to be seen as the guy who says no, 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 right? I can't help it. Even though I try to be a more positive, so I need the chief data officer to work together on, yes, this is what you can do. So by allowing that autonomy of both of what you can do and what you can't do, I think you can fit a business model around that. So that's my advice, really, bring those things together versus getting too focused on tools and then getting lost in the technology.
That's a great point.
Kelley, can I jump on this one? So, it is interesting. We secure the applications, we secure the networks, we secure the endpoints, we secure the cloud platforms through all this successive collection of tools. And I know that you have a variety of entrepreneurs and venture capital friends there that hopefully are listening to this. And what we really don't have is a good way of measuring the efficacy of different tools. And so at the end of the day, you only buy these tools and hire the staff to reduce risk. And if you're convinced after you've purchased the first 20 tools or the 40 tools that, and I don't even know what the metric is you're measuring against, but let's say like you're 80% protected, when that 41st tool shows up, well, is it going to move my needle from like 80% protection to 81, or is it going to move it to 80.004, before I spend that dollar? But you can, David can jump in here, but you can be darn sure that when the vendor shows up, they're going to say, this is the missing puzzle piece. Like, I'm not telling you to get rid of the other 40 things, but this is the magic key to the magic kingdom. Once this flips into the puzzle, you're like 100% protected. Like, you should never have to worry again for the rest of your life. I'm exaggerating, but that's sort of the pitch. So anybody that can come up with some kind of a rating or efficacy barometer, even it doesn't have to be super precise, but can help people understand, like, I want to buy down risk. And if I got another $5 million to spend, what's the best investment that I can make? You know, it's like taking sometimes those health quizzes on your PC that say, gee, if you just like, you know, put a seatbelt on, that adds 5 years to your life. You know, if you could stop drinking 5 bottles of Coke a day, you might live 2 years longer or something.
Right.
That's what we need.
Well, that actually brings up the next question. So great segue, but what technologies do you stay away from? David, curious your take. I mean, you get pitched a lot of startups, a lot of vendors. What do you stay away from? What just is not interesting for you or practical or, you know, whatever reason that you don't like?
Yeah, you know, as I've been talking about, which is, you know, I want those who are gonna, you know, be based in reality, right? Which is like, so I hate over-promising, and which, you know, obviously that's just the natural course of a sales process. But I really don't think, you know, that pays off well at all, right? Because we know this is a complicated issue, right? This is not a simple thing, and this definitely requires end-to-end strategy, architecture, design as you get to it. So I really think it's about or, you know, anybody who tries to say, yes, we can discover anything on your network and we can discover anything on your, you know, it's just such claims that really are baseless. Really what's needed is to say, you know, here's how we fit into, you know, strategy, like here's the, you know, here's how we're flexible, here's how we can integrate into your pieces, right? So I think that's the key things I'm looking for. So yeah, unfortunately, there's just too many out there who are still saying DLP, you know, in itself, as if that's going to solve anything. So really need to, maybe we also need to help the industry by coming up with, you know, more interesting vocabulary, right, to break it down into pieces, as what Mark's tried to do by, you know, trying to call it, you know, more about protection and how do you get through that, and the usage piece as well. So yeah, so that's my call, which is, I think we're still in the age where people are trying to sell you, you know, I don't know, some kind of a magic potion on that. Whereas I think I would rather see the reality that this will cover pieces of it. And so we will do this part really well, right? And I think that's the part that I would want to choose, because if I can see that, okay, with Office 365, Microsoft, you know, what they can give me, or, you know, let's say I use Proofpoint for my email protection, they can cover that piece really well. Great. You know, I don't have to worry about that. Now I got to worry about the the SaaS usage. I got different pieces there. If I could break down my areas of vulnerability by saying the email channel is well covered from a DLP standpoint, okay, great. Then how do I get through that? And then how do I just consistently do it across? You know, and that's part of the way I think through it, because I know that there's no silver bullet. So I think that I just want others to face my reality and kind of work with me.
Got it. And Mark, curious your take. Any technologies you see where you just shake your head and say, you know, not sure if this is going to go anywhere?
I won't be that specific, but I will. So as you know, SOAR tools, security orchestration and response tools, are considered to be sort of the next generation after SIEM. And in fact, many of the leading SIEM vendors went out and bought startup companies that offered SOAR capabilities. My only caution there is most SOAR platforms, they're very sophisticated. You know, they're not for the faint at heart. And so you really want to master some of these other technologies, you know, trying again to configure the business rules into translate business rules into the operational procedures. I think some people think the SOAR tools are there to actually, you know, catch the first sign of something going wrong and immediately taking action. That's not really how they tend to work. I mean, they tend to help focus the attention of your SOC, your security analysts, on some of the things that are most anomalous, which is a good thing. And they also kind of help with an orderly end-to-end management of incidents, you know, closing out an incident properly and filing it away and documenting it, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all good stuff too. But the idea that they're this lightning rod that can sniff out the first indication of something, you know, that may be threatening or whatever, and then like take immediate action and that there's the silver bullet, that's probably not going to happen. And you know, many security teams just aren't, with all due respect, you know, they just aren't sophisticated enough to make good use of the tool. So it's kind of a shiny new toy that a lot of people kind of get, excited about, but you want to be kind of careful you don't have buyer's remorse if you're not up to the job.
Absolutely. And actually, David, just wanted to jump on a point that you made earlier about, you have all these channels, email, web, SaaS, and then how do you think about, because a lot of the tools that you might purchase from Proofpoint already has DLP, from Zscaler already has DLP, from Netskope has some form of DLP. Do you prefer to go maybe best of breed DLP solution that can incorporate all of those different channels, or do you prefer to do do you prefer to go portfolio approach of one large DLP solution, or best of breed for each channel?
Yeah. So it goes with my essential belief that DLP is not one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, it gets so broadly. Like if you get this tool, then it could cover, right? It's got to be applied, right? So yes, how do you do DLP in a mail channel? How do you DLP a way that one thing can fix all the methods there, right? So yeah, I definitely look at it from a best of breed standpoint, but then this is why I'm also stuck with 2,000 tools, right? Which is how do I get through that? Right. So I definitely need to be able to bring that together, right? So if I need to look at data overall, if I'm talking to, let's say, a chief data officer in our company and saying, hey, how do we look like from here? I have to explain each of them separately, right? Go through that. But that may be then overall, how do we look, right? So again, we got to be able to provide that analytics in terms of how does that look like. But yeah, I just don't see that. So back to your other question about, I stay away from vendors who claim, we can take care of your email, we can take care of your web. It's like, really? Because in the old days, I guess I'm old enough, the whole notion of doing network filtering as a choke point, right? To be able to put your DLP tool in. Well, maybe that kind of worked when your network was in a choke point, right? Well, with the way that we have created open networks and zero trust, all that's not true. It just cannot be, right? So I think again that's where things have shifted, and that's why the old notion of DLP has failed. And really, we should stop calling it that. And it really should be, what it is that you need to do for it. And so therefore, everybody needs to adopt DLP. So I'm glad that Microsoft has adopted DLP in Office 365. They need to do more. Like you mentioned Zscaler, you mentioned Proofpoint. Yeah, everybody's doing it, but not everybody's consistent, right? So this is where we have to up the game, and we have to begin to create more standards to say that, yes, I know what Proofpoint's talking about. It's the same thing that Microsoft's talking about, blah, blah, blah. We need to have that kind of language in there.
Great. And then last question from me before we turn it over to Q&A, but where do you see the most hope, Mark and David? Curious if there's any place where you're really excited.
Yeah, well, maybe kind of a dream, and this goes back to my age. Remember Napster? Remember those days when you used to be ripping off that music when essentially it's like, hey, it's free because I could get it anywhere, right? Actually, I remember, there was something cool about it, but obviously not very good to the artist and what was going on there, right? So, and if you think about it, there's, you don't hear much about Napster or anything similar to that, anymore. Pretty much you get your music through iTunes or, whatever. So there's this notion of digital rights management, right? That kind of comes in. Now, I'm not saying you do it exactly the way that they did with iTunes and other music, and even the same thing with streaming of movies, right? But we have to take the concept and the idea of to be able to protect the data at its core element, right? And so that it goes with it wherever it may be. So I think there's things there that we should be, certainly looking more into, and I'd love to see more vendors, thinking that way and kind of helping us with solutions. So I think we need to start again, mentally start thinking of strategies from like a digital rights management approach. And I think if we can do that, treat the data as if it is, give it essentially its own kind of digital rights to it. So yeah, I would love to see more of that. And if we were to do it, again, I'm not good at a solution because I don't know how to do it, but I would love to see a day where it could be protected so that we don't have the Napster situation.
Definitely. Mark?
I'm going to say pretty much the same thing David did, but maybe in a different way. We've got to shift from all this perimeter-based thinking about data security, just the checklist you just rattled off. Microsoft's going to protect this, Proofpoint's going to protect that, Palo Alto Networks is going to protect us over here. There's like a XDR solution for my endpoints I'm going to go buy, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's the Tower of Babel, and it's fundamentally not going to work at the end of the day. And there's a tremendous Me Tooism, which you correctly point out, that everybody wants to be able to check some form of a DLP box or pay homage to that concept. And where we really need to go, just like David said, is really, you know, a data-centric, an asset-centric approach where the asset inherits these kind of restrictions from source systems. It's aware of the environment in which it lives and can have some degree of ability to pull the plug if the vulnerabilities of that environment, you know, are too egregious, and has a way to protect itself from, you know, permission creep and privilege escalation. I mean, these capabilities need to be tied to the critical assets, and they only will be if people really get serious about like what's worth protecting in the corporation. None of this will work if you try to take this peanut butter approach and protect everything at the same level. That's doomed to failure, and people just have to get, you know, use a real business Occam's razor, and you really just say, hey, at the end of the day, you know, for all the data in the corporation, there's a really fairly limited subset that are really, really important to us. So classification always comes first.
Awesome. Well, we'll move over to the Q&A. We had a bunch of questions. The first one that I'll ask you guys is, when should enterprises use or not use encryption?
David?
Yeah, I'll cover this because I get asked this a lot on it. So encryption is a tool, right? Okay, think of it that way. It's not like something that you bound something all the time. So, you know, what security people will be looking for is, yeah, what are the mitigating controls, right? So if you're not going to encrypt it because you got performance issues, you got, you know, whatever the usage may be, you have, you know, is it done on a logical level? You know, so again, it depends. You know, I sound like a lawyer. It depends, right? So, but what I'm looking for is, yeah, the mitigating controls. If you're not going to encrypt, you know, what is the environment going to be, and how much is the data going to be, you know, moving? And also, are we talking about data at rest, or are we talking about encryption in terms of transport layer? Right. So those are the things to go through. So yeah, you know, encryption itself is not a panacea. You know, go through. It is a method to be used, but it's also going to be done right, because done incorrectly, such as doing bad key management, your encryption is worthless. Okay? If you don't have good key management that ties with that. So again, it's really that offset. So definitely bring in an architect and have the architect also work with your security team to kind of balance that with the usage, the need versus the protection that you want to get to. And then, yeah, what Mark talked, least privilege is also part of it as well. So after you're done with the thing, you know, stop having access. You know, we shouldn't have to have unlimited 24 hours a day access. It should only be used when you need it, when it's done, and then everything needs to be logged going through that. So again, the holistic approach is the key thing.
Yeah, good there. So the answer is yes to encryption. Recognize there's many different forms of encryption. Some are more sophisticated than others. You don't need homomorphic encryption for, you know, every event that happens in the corporation. But you know, data should never be in the clear when in motion. That's
yeah. Well, actually, the follow-up to that, I'm kind of curious to take here, is the quantum encryption. Is that a concern at all right now for security leaders, or is that farther down the road? Or yeah,
pretty cutting edge. I don't think
well,
a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't think there's enough. I mean, it's hard enough to understand and to try to get through. So, you know, there's computing itself, but yeah, in terms of quantum computing, yeah, the fact that, okay, some bad guy is going to take quantum computing and break every encryption algorithm. Okay, yeah, I mean, if that exists, and that's really, I don't think we're there anytime soon, or at least not in my immediate lifetime. So, but yeah, you know, like all challenges, you know, that's something that we have to consider. So, you know, I rather focus on the positive, what you can do with quantum to get to that. And then, like I said, you know, encryption itself is not the only solution, right? So we have to kind of look at it end to end, get to that. So yeah, I'm not too concerned with that right now.
Got it. So the next question I have is, how do you balance getting more visibility and insights with staying on top of remediation and trending down the added risk that you see?
Wow. So yeah, that's kind of my everyday thing, right? So it's kind of like, oh, don't tell me anymore. I just got to deal with what I have, right? You know, it's, you know, changing the tires as the car is moving, and you're constantly picking up more passengers along the way. So there's a term that I've been using, which is to slow down in order to go faster, right? So you got to have your program in place. You got to have some basic, tools. You got to have metrics in place so you can see the trends, what it's going through. If you don't have that, then you need to slow down and like literally shut down things, until you get to that point. Once I have that, then I could say, okay, we can go faster, and I could see, because am I fixing yesterday's problem, like from 6 months ago, or am I fixing a problem that just occurred right now, right? So, that goes into how long has a bad guy been on my network, right? Because I've had a vulnerability for so long that I don't even realize it, and I haven't touched it, right? So I think there's a time waiting to that in terms of how you're able to manage it. So, but that's pretty much what I do every day in terms of trying to balance that new stuff versus old stuff, and how do I balance the remediation of all that.
Right.
It's ironic, we buy these tools, and every new tool usually sends off a new flurry of alerts to the SOC. And so the first thing we do is we tune the tool, which means that we raise the threshold levels, or whatever, to limit the number of alerts that are coming in. So we don't really fully use the capabilities of the tool. It's kind of a paradoxical, concept and it gets back to the efficacy comment that I made before. Like, so we bought this tool. In principle, it could buy us another 2% risk reduction, but guess what? We don't have enough people in the SOC, so let's dial the thing back, and we're not even going to get the full benefit of the 2% after we made the investment in the technology.
Awesome. And then I think we have time for one last question. I think the one here is, what do you look for in a PII detection system in unstructured data? Any key criteria or things that you've looked at when evaluating unstructured data security solutions?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go first, and I don't know everything about it, but certainly this is where AI and ML come into play, right? In terms of if the machine can learn it, and you could give it a set of things that's predictive, right? So in terms of that, it could read a document and then it could learn from there. You could train it to get through. So that's certainly doable. It's not 100%, but as you get closer to like 95, 96%, I think that's a great indicator. I don't mind getting a few false positives, right, to get through. And then there's AI where, let's say I have such a crazy set of IP that I need to protect, and it's too difficult to kind of train. Then yeah, I need that thing to figure it out. So I don't know what that looks like. I think the AI part is going to take much longer to kind of figure out what that may be. So it's literally have to kind of get up, your lawyers, your privacy people, your, a whole bunch of people together to say, recognize these set of things, and that's what we're trying to protect. So I think that part is hard, but I definitely think ML is capable with that, because again, there's a set of patterns that you're trying to train it. And so if a human, a lawyer or privacy person could read a document and say exactly what is important that needs to be protected, then I think you can train the ML to be able to do that. So I'm hoping that we'll see more of that to give us again, another tool, but at least it will give us something that we could use.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I would agree. There's been a lot of progress in that fashion. I was talking to one startup company that does exactly that. It scans unstructured data. And after they built a customer base, they claimed that for every new customer they came into, if they looked at some of the unstructured data that was being handled, like in a finance department or an HR department, there was huge commonality from one company to the next. Like within a very short period of time, once they scanned all of the data assets of the finance team, they could tag like 70% correct the unstructured data that actually had some kind of sensitivity associated with it. So to your point, David, I agree. ML's made a huge impact here.
Yeah, a ton of efficiency gain. Well, Mark, David, really appreciated the time. Thank you for sharing all the insights. For everybody here, thank you for joining. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, Mark's blog is on our site. You can check out all of his, all the things he wrote about for data misuse prevention and where he's seeing the market going. We'll be doing more of these webinars in the future, so hope to see you there. But with that, Mark and David, thanks again. See you, everybody.
Kelley.